and we'll go ahead and we'll get started. I just want to let you know, this is a lesson that's been brewing for a while, and Trace said to me yesterday, she said, how's your lesson coming? And I said, I think it's going to be really good. I think it's going to be really good. Now, I say that not with any type of arrogance, because this morning as I was reviewing it, I thought, man, this may be a complete train wreck, which I think is just the enemy talking to me. I share that with you because I trust there's going to be value. It's my intent to add value to you here this morning. And so I want to encourage you to look for that value this morning. Maybe a little extra attention to looking for that value this morning. I want to start out just with a couple of questions for you, just by show of hands. How many of you know other believers? All right, okay. How many of you know some non-believers? Oh, very good, very good. We're called to be salt and light. And to do that, we need to do that with people who are lost and in darkness. And, if you're running around in the daylight with a flashlight, it doesn't do a whole lot. You need to have that, you need to give that light to the darkness is really where it is. And by having some non-believing friends, that absolutely gives us the opportunity to multiply. It gives us the opportunity to multiply, as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks. Now, for those of you with non-believing friends, my question is this: how many of you want to tell them about Jesus? How many of you want to tell them about Jesus? Okay. How many of you have told them about Jesus? It's getting a little more difficult, right? It's a little more difficult, right? And the question becomes, how did that go? You tell somebody about Jesus, and does that always go sunshine and lollipops? Sometimes there's some challenges. Today Trace and I have this opportunity where my dad said yesterday, he said, hey, after church tomorrow, would you be willing to ride with me down to Sewickley? He has a customer from the shop whose wife is terminal. Dad came in the other night for dinner, and he said, I got a call from my customer. He told me his wife's terminal. She has 2 to 4 weeks. And my dad was a little shook up over this. And for those of you that know my dad's a pretty emotional guy. Anyway, what I know is this, is that is a non-believing family. That's a non-believing family. And so my dad says yesterday, hey, customer called and wanted to know if my dad would come pick something up, but he lives down in Sewickley. And he said, would you ride with me after church down to Sewickley? I said, sure. He said, if we go that far, maybe we can get your son and we can go get lunch. I said, better yet, the deal gets better, right? But we potentially face the opportunity today to share the love of Jesus with a family who is in an interesting situation. And I guess I'll just say right up front, ask for your prayers for 1:30 to 2 o'clock. Trace is going to go with us, so that's where it is. So this lesson may be very practical for me here in whatever it is, a couple of hours. But if you noticed, I start off this morning, and I asked you a lot of questions. Right? I was asking you to raise your hand. I was asking you these questions. And I want just to ask you this. What's your posture related to those questions? Sometimes when you ask people questions, it's like, whoa, and they lean back. Right? You can ask questions that sort of push people back. You can also ask questions that pull people forward. My question for you right now, do you think that those questions I asked you this morning, did they pull you in or push you back, or did they make no difference? They were intended to pull you in. They were intended to pull you in to say, how many of you know believing friends? Oh, I do. And you lean in a little bit. How many of you know non-believing friends? And you raise your hand. How many of you have done this? And and the intent is to pull you in, to get you to lean in, and even take even the smallest movement forward. Today's lesson is about asking quality questions. And this is a lesson that's taken me probably the better part of 20 years to get to this point. I'm not telling you that it's a complete lesson. I'm telling you it's as complete as it's going to be right now after 20 years of being in this particular space. And, whenever I say things like that, it's really bizarre because in my head, I'm about 30 years old, physically, in my head. In reality, it's much more than that, but in my head, like, I'm always going to be late 20s, early 30s. It's a weird thing. Maybe you understand where I'm coming from there. But I know it takes time for some of these lessons to ripen. And it's ripened over a combination of experience that I've had as a pharmacist with patient care. It's a lesson that's ripened as being a patient going through the healthcare system. It's a lesson that's ripened as I worked for a Fortune 100 company in the corporate office. It's also a lesson that's ripened, and it probably started based on attending a Christian apologetics conference about 20 years ago. So I want to give you some of these puzzle pieces with the intent of being able to link them together here this morning. I think it was the early 2000s, and I think Trace went with me, but over at the CMA Church, they had a Christian apologetics conference. And does that throw anybody off? If I use that term Christian apologetics, do you know what that means, or do I need to? It's like, how do you use logic to prove Christianity is the very simplistic. And I went, I don't remember if it was a 1 or a 2 day conference, but they said, there's these 3 simple questions that you need to ask people that can open the door for you to be able to, share the story of Jesus. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And, we'll get to those here in a minute. But I thought that's an interesting formula to use. Now, most of you also know that I'm a pharmacist by education, and I would tell you that in my first year of pharmacy school, in the first semester, I learned a grand total of 2 drugs. The first drug I learned was aspirin. The second drug I learned was Tylenol. That's what I learned, whenever I come home at Christmas time after the first semester, the family's like, oh, what are you learning about? And I say, I've learned aspirin. And they're like, that's it? That's where it was. By the end of the first year, most of what I had learned about were over-the-counter medicines. That was basically how the curriculum went. And, it's interesting now because all those drugs I learned about 25 years, 30 years ago, man, this lesson keeps getting worse. All these things I learned about back then, there's so many of them that aren't available now but I want to share with you how I was taught to process those because it has a huge amount of how did I learn to ask questions? How did I learn to ask questions? You see, one of the things that they wanted us to learn how to do early on is how would you make a recommendation? So when somebody comes into the pharmacy and says, hey, what would you recommend for a cold? Anybody ever done that? Nobody's ever done that? Okay, all right. What would you recommend for allergies? I got this thing going on with my eye. What would you like? We had to learn those different things. And what we were done is we were taught to ask a series of yes or no questions, and it looked like some type of decision tree. Somebody comes in, they ask a question, you get yes, you get no, you have your next question, yes, no. And then eventually you get down to one of these different things and you would recommend different, I'm going to put R1, R2, R3, R4. What would you recommend in these different scenarios? That's how we were taught to do. And it was just a series of, oh, did you have this? Oh, I have this cough. And I would ask a series of yes or no questions. Oh, is it a dry cough? And they would say yes or no, right? Oh, it is a dry cough. If it's a dry cough, then I would recommend this, that, or the other thing. And I was taught that because I was taught this is the fastest way to get an answer. This is the fastest way to get an answer, a series of yes or no questions, because life is going to be busy. You want to be able to get through this stuff. Anybody have a busy life? Oh, most of you. Most of you have a busy life. And so sometimes what we do is we think that how we process this is going to be the fastest way to get through it. It was about 2010, and I was working on a project that looked at a topic called medication adherence. Now, in the nerd world of pharmacy, what medication adherence is it's how well people take their medicine as prescribed, right? I hope you're not familiar with that, but in my world, that was very much a big thing. And as I'm working on this project, one of the things that we looked at is we looked at how do pharmacists ask questions. I'm going to tell you that this was a major breakthrough for me. It was at this point that I began to understand that questions are a major tool, and how we use that tool is so important. So I want you all to walk out of here this morning understanding this first. One, that you have a tool, and that tool is asking questions. And now I want you to take the next step and understand that if you have this tool, using that tool the right way can get you the right result. My grandfather was a carpenter, and there was one project he pulled me on one day, and he said, Jess, there's no job that's too difficult if you have the right tool. If you don't have the right tool, things become very, very difficult. So I want you to know that you have this tool, but I want you to be working and developing this particular tool with me here today. It was at this point that I learned that there was two main buckets of questions. There's a bucket that are called open-ended. I'm going to put questions up here. Open-ended and closed-ended. There's two different types. All right. Now, I was taught to use closed-ended questions. And let me just give you the definition. A closed-ended question is a question that can be answered with one or two words. Do you have a dry cough? Yes or no? It's a closed-ended question, very easy to get to, right? Are you getting any sleep at night? Yes or no? That's what it was. That's how I was taught. I was taught to use closed-ended questions. Now, open-ended questions then are the opposite. They have an unlimited answer, right? So, and what I learned, and this is a hack, this is a life hack for you, for those of you that are taking notes, I want you to make sure that you write this down. Questions that are open-ended start with the words what, how, and why. If I said to you, what are you going to do this afternoon? And you answered yes, like the conversation would get awkward real quick, wouldn't it? And like we've all been a part of a question like that, right? We've answered the wrong question. But open-ended questions, asking questions that start with what, how, and why can be so helpful in unlocking and learning more things. I learned as I was working on that medication adherence project that there was huge value in asking open-ended questions because I got all sorts of information to be able to leverage at that point. I would tell you this, as you look at this, of these three open-ended questions, the one that I would encourage you to use the least is this one, and it is why. And I encourage you to use that the least because why typically we use in an accusatory way. Like, why are you being an idiot today?
Why are you going this way?
Yeah, why are you going down 322? That was the question I had yesterday. Yeah, why are you going this way? And I was like, I don't have the foggiest clue. Right? That's where we are. So I'm not saying that you can't use why. I'm going to tell you that just be cautious in using why because when you use why, it can become very accusatory. Why don't you believe in Jesus? Maybe some of us have actually asked that question at some point. I would tell you that, as I was working on that project, one of the questions that I would ask a patient before that would go something like this. It's a closed-ended question. Are you taking the medicine as the doctor prescribed? Right? And they would answer Yes. Then on the other side, they're thinking, what type of idiot do you think I am? Of course I'm taking it as he told me to. He may not they may not understand the right way to take it, but what I learned is that that's a poor question to ask. A better question to ask was, how are you taking this medication? And then when I learned that question, now all of a sudden I got all this information. I got all this information like, oh, I take this medicine when I get up. I take it when I get up, I take it with breakfast, I take it with lunch, I take it when I'm watching Wheel of Fortune at night, I take it whenever. Like I was getting all sorts of information that said, oh, now I got things that I can grab a hold of. Now I have some leverage points in this particular conversation. What I had to learn is I had to learn how to ask open-ended questions, and that was a real challenge for me because I had just been trained so much to use closed-ended questions. And you may find yourself in very much the same place. Have you ever asked, like there are times, like when you know who you're dealing with, this is the story I should have shared with you. This is the story. Where are we at time-wise here? Okay, I got time. Last week, Trace's dad had surgery. He comes home. And Trace is a good daughter. She's calling and checking on her dad. Dad, how are you feeling? I'm doing pretty good. She calls her dad last Sunday night. She says, Dad, how are you doing? He says, oh, I don't know. We're sitting here in the dark. And Trace said, oh, well, we're just getting ready to watch the Steeler game. And so her dad says, oh, I guess I'll come over. Trace said, well, it's like getting late. And he said, well, maybe I won't come over. And she said, do this. If you decide to come over, text Jess that you're coming. I'm in the other room. I have no idea this whole thing is unfolding. All of a sudden, my phone rings. Ding. It's my father-in-law. And the text says, I'm on my way. What type of, if you get a text at 9:30 at night, and it says, I'm on my way, I'm like, what is this about? And so I walk into the other room. Trace, I just got a text message from your dad. It says I'm on my way. And she says, oh, he's coming over to watch the game. Like, why is this happening? Now, I tell you that story because when Trace's dad comes, he gets confused on these. I will ask closed-ended questions because I know the danger of asking open-ended questions to my father-in-law. It's bad. It's like there's times if I say, hey, what do you he loves talking politics. I say, hey, what do you think about what Trump did this week? You're like, boom, it opens up. So I've learned to ask closed-ended questions. Because I only want a yes or no answer. It's sort of like stepping out on the ice, and I got to be careful if it's solid, right? I don't want to go in and go under. And so there's times where I'll ask a closed-ended question because all I want is a yes or no. And depending on how that happens, then I'll figure out how I'm going to navigate the conversation from there. But there's sometimes I ask him a yes or no question, and he jumps over here, and I start getting all this information that I don't want. Don't care, don't want, and the thing is, other people are like that too. Other people do it. There's times where I'll say, when are we having dinner? Valid question. Have you ever had that question in your household? Hey, when's dinner going to be ready? Closed-ended question, 5:30, 6 o'clock, whatever the time turns out to be. And boom, open-ended response. Oh, I haven't figured out. It just goes. It just goes. So you have to understand the value of these things and where to use them. But I'm going to tell you, there is such value in leveraging these open-ended questions because of the information that you're able to get. Now, I want to pause here for a moment, and I want to transition to as a patient accessing the healthcare system. Now, I think most of you have been around me long enough to know that I am a world champion kidney stone maker. I have produced, I think, upwards of 24 of those in my life so far, and it's interesting. Every time that the first time I had this, I literally thought I was going to die. I was in college. I woke up. I thought this is the day I'm going to die. I was in misery. After that, every one that I go through, it's like I know what's going on here. I can keep my wits about me. But it's interesting. I'm in misery, and somebody comes in and they start talking to me about my diet, and they come in and they start lecturing me about my diet? Well, if you have kidney stones, you really should avoid green leafy vegetables. And I'm like, newsflash, sweetheart, I've been avoiding green leafy vegetables my whole life. Like, this ain't news for me. Like, it's like, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And they'll say something like, well, you really should be drinking a lot of water. You should be drinking about 2 liters of water a day. And I say, you know what, I've been drinking 4 liters of water a day. And then they sort of short circuit, right? Because they're not asking questions. They come in and they just bowl you over with information. And I share that with you because as believers, we do that. We find a non-believer and we just bowl them over with all this information. You need to avoid your green leafy vegetables. Well, I've been doing that. You need to conduct yourself in this particular way. And they'll say, well, I've already been doing that. Right? We need to recognize just how that is. I have come to realize in my professional life just the importance of asking the right questions. Not just in being able to diagnose the problems and to figure out what's going on, but in being able to guide people towards better outcomes. And that's what we want to do. As believers that are challenged to share the good news with other people, we want to help people get to better outcomes, do we not? And part of that is by asking good questions. And I'm going to suggest to you that nobody demonstrated asking great questions better than Jesus. Right? I gave you a handout here, and this is not a comprehensive handout, but I think on that handout there are 60 questions stolen from the Gospels of questions that Jesus asked. And I just want you to be looking at it. I don't think it's a comprehensive list. I used a computer to put it together. But I just want you to take a look at all those different questions that he asked. And I'm sure you can find other ones. But I just take a note of what type of questions is he asking. Is he asking open-ended questions? Is he asking closed-ended questions? Like what's going on? And just to get a sense. And I encourage you as you are reading stories of Jesus just to have your radar tuned to how does he ask questions. Look at how he uses these questions. Because asking the right questions can unlock understanding and it can build relationships. And that's what Jesus did to be able to teach and lead people. Jesus just didn't come here and give out all sorts of answers. Jesus shows up and he asks a bunch of questions. And lives changed. They changed everywhere. Crowds were following him around. He was drawing people closer to God by asking the right questions at the right time. And for your notes, I would encourage you just to understand this. Good leaders ask great questions. Good leaders don't give all sorts of commands. Good leaders ask great questions. And we've come to the agreement before in this class that everybody in here is a leader. Whether you like it or not, whether you're good at it or not, and I think we're all students here, so we're all saying we want to become better at that. But if we want to be able to lead people well, one of the things we have to do is we need to be able to ask great questions. If you would, Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5. It says, "The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out." How do you draw those things out? You draw things out by asking questions. I thought you were actually recording me, Michelle. I was like, is that me? You draw something out by asking questions. I found a quote. It said, "Successful people ask better questions, and as a result, they get better answers." When we ask better questions, we will get better answers. James 1:5 says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, what should you do? You should ask God." You ask God this question. The question is, can you give me some more wisdom? And it says, "God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you." So I want to start out here. Well, I mean, we've started out, I guess, a few times here. But what are some benefits? I need more boards. What are some benefits of asking questions? What are some benefits of asking questions? The first benefit, I think, is that it will stimulate growth. Right? If you ask the right question, now all of a sudden somebody has to stretch and grow. And they're like, how is that? Why is that such a, what's standing between you and that? And it gets people to pause and think, and they say, and as they say something, and I've seen this, it's like a light bulb goes off. You see a difference in people's eyes when you ask the right question and like the lights come on. It's really a neat thing. When you ask good questions, people can grow. Second thing, when you ask good questions, people can become empowered, right? We can empower people by encouraging them to think critically. And the last thing I have is that when we ask good questions, we can build relationships. So yesterday morning, we're getting ready to leave, and Bryn's already left for the cross-country meet. Trace and I are getting ready to leave, and we have somebody in our house who is, she hasn't come out and told us this yet, but I'm reasonably sure that she's a conscientious objector. And I say that with this definition: she objects to being conscious. The alarm was going off. I could hear the alarm at the other end of the house, and I'm like, where on earth is that? And I come back, and she is zonked out. Like she is, and it got me to thinking yesterday morning about how when all the kids were little, they at various points they would come over and try to get in bed with mom and dad in the middle of the night. Anybody else experience that? Did anybody like that? I liked that. Because I knew that today was coming. I knew that today was coming. I knew that the day that the kids are going to be like too cool for mom and dad, or mom and dad, the only thing they were going to do was going to embarrass them. So whenever I had the opportunity, I'm like, hey, come on over. And so yesterday, I did the reverse of that. Taryn will not wake up. The alarm's going off. I go in there, and so I decide I'm going to wake her up by getting into bed with her. And she's sprawled in bed. And so I had to push and nudge and do all these different things. But I tell you that because it was asking questions that actually changed Jess on this for good. Like he was coming over every night, and Trace is like, the kids should never come to our bed. And I'm like, at one point he's going to be big, and he's like, he won't want to come home, which is why we're going to Pittsburgh today. I said to him, I asked him a series of questions, and after I asked him that series of questions, he only came over and got in bed with us one other time after that. He would have been 6 or 7 years old at the time. And it was just, that was such a impactful lesson for me, and how you ask questions can change what people do. And I'll give you some of those tips on what I did here in just a minute. When we ask those really good questions, when we ask those great questions, they get us to think, and they get us to change. And I want to draw your attention to 2 questions that Jesus asked. I believe these are on you may want to circle these on your board or on your sheet there. But he asked his disciples this question. He said, "Who do you say I am?" Matthew 16:15. Who do you say I am? That's a very important question for us to answer. That's an important question for anybody to answer. Who is this guy? Like, we've heard about Jesus, but like, who was he? There's times, Mark 10:51, I think, let me find the right context for this. Is this with the man born blind? I'm wanting to say that it is. Yeah. You would think in this story that it'd be quite obvious. Blind man comes to Jesus, and Jesus says to the blind man, "What do you want me to do for you?" This is a question that Jesus asked. Is it because Jesus could somehow not tell that this guy was blind? It's probably pretty obvious. He asked this question so that the man became clear on what he wanted. And there's a lot of people today that do not know what they want. If Jesus was to say to you today, "What do you want me to do for you?" how do you answer? Or do you run in circles? Now, there is a difference between good questions and bad questions. Well, I take that. There's a difference between good questions and great questions. Good questions gather information. They give us other pieces of the puzzle. You know, what's happening, what's going on, why do you think this happened? But great questions get us to think. I shared this quote, I think maybe I shared this quote with you guys a couple of weeks ago. I shared it with my girls and they thought this was fantastic, but there's a quote that goes something like this: only 2% of people think, 3% think they think, and 95% of people would rather die than think, right? Like there's a lot of people out there that are resistant to thinking. Great questions will challenge people to think, and whenever they start to think, now they start to grow, they start to, they become empowered, you start to build those relationships, those things all work together, right? A great question may sound something like this: what's missing here? How do we change this situation? Anybody can say what's going on. Somebody, it takes some different muscles to say, well, how do we change this? How do we change this? I want to encourage you to practice asking great questions. I want to challenge you to ask questions that lead to reflection and thinking and ultimately action. And this is where I think it may be appropriate to share with you those 3 questions that I was taught at the Worldview Academy. They were saying, how are you going to share the story of Jesus with other people? And there's a number of things that you can do, but these were the 3 questions that they gave. The first one is this: what happens when you die? It's a big question. What do you think happens when you die? Some people say, oh, I guess you just go to sleep. Some people say, well, when you die, you automatically go to heaven, right? They have those things. Follow-up question is this: how do you know that to be true? How do you know that to be true? Because there's a lot of people that say, well, if at the end of life, whenever I die, if I've done more good things than bad things, then things are going to be all right for me, right? That seems a reasonable solution, doesn't it? It's seduced a lot of people. How do you know that's true? How do you evaluate what your good things and your bad things are? Or how do you know that you're scoring that correctly? And the last question was, what if you're wrong? What if you think you've done all these good things over the course of your life, but then when you die, you find out you were scoring it the wrong way? What if you're wrong? What do you do? And the way they presented us to it is that gives you the opportunity. Can I share my answers to these questions? These are questions that I would encourage you to be able to answer. But we have to learn how to ask questions like this. The note I have here is, we are in prime political season, and there's all kinds of debates and arguments. And I want to encourage you to just have your radar up, have your eyes open, have your ears open to how do those conversations go? What type of questions are being asked? Or are they all accusations, right? There's all sorts of stuff. There's great questions, there's good questions, and then there's like junk, and there's probably a lot of that stuff out there that's just junk, right? So I want to, part of this was to, equip you with this particular skill set, this tool bag. But you'll see that because there's so much of this, people become conditioned to question people in certain ways. Right? They'll say, oh, if this is your important, political topic, this is what you should do. Right? There's a lot of things that happen out there like that. If we want to be able to lead people to Christ, we need to ask great questions that get people to take a moment to reflect and to think. And this is a skill that most people haven't developed. And I can just tell you, I shared with you the early part of my career. I was taught very much a particular way to go. I was not well equipped with that. It took a number of years just to become aware of that this was a skill set that I could develop. So how do we develop the skill of asking great questions? How do we do that? I have 7 things. I have 7 things I want to give you to help you ask great questions. This is where we put the cookies on the bottom shelf today. This is where we make it easy for you. How to ask questions. Number 1, permission. If you want to be able to make headway with people, I'm going to encourage you to start out by asking permission. Linda, do you have a couple of minutes that we can talk? Right? I'm asking permission. Because right now, if I said, Linda, I need to talk to you, now she's leaning back. We talked about that early on, right? Oh my goodness, what does he need to talk to me about? What did I do wrong? But if I say, hey, Linda, you have a couple of minutes? She's like, and she'll say yes or no. Like she may have something to go to, right? But if the answer is yes, what is there, you have somebody who's automatically leaning into the conversation with you. Permission is such a big thing. Now I tell you all these things. I know to do them. I don't always do them. I'm getting better at it. I think I'm getting better at it. Maybe Trace will tell you. Maybe she'll tell you I'm getting worse at it. But this is asking permission gives the opportunity for people to lean into the conversation. And that's what we're looking for. 2, be curious. Did I spell that? I think that's spelled right. Be curious. Go into the conversation with genuine curiosity. Don't go in knowing all the answers. Go in expecting to learn something new. Expect to learn something that may surprise or may shock you, right? This one is most for the men, and I think I've shared with this with you before. This is the life hack of marriage, guys. This is use reflective listening. Now, if you don't know what reflective listening is, this is where you repeat back your spouse. You repeat back the other person's words to them. When you do this, people feel heard. And I'm going to tell you right now, when people don't feel heard, they will use the same words over and over and over again. Somebody was telling me a story about, I don't remember what I think I remember what it was, but I won't tell that particular part of it. But there were a group of people, and they just kept repeating the same thing over again. Well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And they kept repeating that because they didn't feel the other side was listening. When you use reflective listening, when you give those folks their words back to them, that registers in their brain that they were heard. And whenever you really hit the nail on the head, they'll respond with exactly, or that's it, like you get me, right? It's such a key thing. And men, this is what you do with your wives. When your wives say, hey, I don't know what we're going to do for dinner tonight, and I say, well, I understand you don't know what you want to do for dinner, and this is really the key. Would you like to go out for dinner? And, at that point, then everything changes, right? But you just use that. When you reflect those words back to people, it really builds that connection. It's such a it's such a useful tool to be able to connect with people. If you want to ask great questions, number 4, you have to have courage. You're going to have courage to ask some tough questions. I don't feel like I'm necessarily wired real great with courage. That's not something that comes real natural to me. I'll give you this one. 5, I'd call it extremes, but ask about extremes. One of the great questions that you can ask is you can ask about extremes, like what's the best thing that can happen? What's the worst thing that can happen? What's the best thing that's going to happen to your relationship with God if you never go to a Bible class? What's the best thing? If you think about it, you're like, well, I don't know that there's really that many good things that could come from doing that. What's the best thing that can happen if you join a small group? What's the best thing that can happen if you don't join a small group? What's the worst thing that can happen if you join a small group? Well, the worst thing that can happen is I meet a bunch of new people. I guess the worst people could be, I just don't like any of them, right? I guess that might be the worst part. But, the extremes, that helps just anchor things to these different ends. That was actually when I was telling you the story of my son. I asked him, what's the most difficult thing you've ever done in life? And he said, Dad, the most difficult thing I've ever done in life was the swim-a-thon where I swam 100 lengths of the pool. And I said, is swimming 100 lengths of the pool more difficult than sleeping in your own bed? He's like, no. Or he said, oh, swimming was much more difficult than sleeping in my own bed. And at that point, the lights went on. And he's like, I'm a big kid. I'll sleep in my own bed. I don't need you anymore. And then it's carried on from there. But that's where it was. Do the questions, I'm going to put solution, or make sure I spell, revelation. Does the question give you a solution, or does it open up something? Do they see something new? What's the next step? Where do we go from here? That's that type of question. Okay, well, where do we go from here? That opens up solutions that, oh, well, this is where we are. Number 7, you want to ask good questions. We need to challenge. How did I write this? Challenge assumptions. I do some mentoring with some different folks, and I was having this conversation with a guy, and he was pretty worked up about something, and I thought it was a bit overblown. That was my take, but it was not overblown to him. He was pretty concerned about it. And so what I did is I said, hey, can I ask you a difficult question? And he said, well, yeah, right? He leaned into the conversation. I said to him, which hand is good and which hand is bad? You have a right hand and a left hand. Which one's good and which one's bad? And he thought for a minute, and he said, well, neither. They just are. And we continued the conversation. He was really hung up. He was concerned that there was a lot of conversation around this word intentionality, and intentionality is a principle that you've heard me teach here before, and I think it's impacted a lot of you before. But he was concerned that intentionality puts too much emphasis on us and not enough emphasis on God. And I said, okay. So we went through and I said, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, if it's all right with you. And we went through this and I said, which hand's good, your right or your left? I said, is your phone good or bad? He said, well, it just is. It depends on what you do with it. I said, well, I want you to consider, I'm going to challenge your assumption that intentionality is bad. And I want you to consider that intentionality just is. It's what are you intentional about? And the lights went on. His posture changed. He went from sitting like this to sitting like this. Right? How we ask questions makes such an important impact. So as we wrap up today, I want to call back to a story that I'm sure you've heard. Jesus went with his parents to Jerusalem. They left, but he stayed behind. When they came back looking for him, this is from Luke chapter 2, verse 46. It says, after 3 days of looking through Jerusalem, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Jesus, world-class question asker. Jesus became influential by asking questions and by listening. And I'm going to tell you, I believe that same opportunity exists for you and me today. We can increase our influence and we can make an impact on the people around us by asking quality questions. So I want to encourage you to develop the habit of asking great questions in all areas of your life. In your home, at work, at church, people that you just come in contact with. I want to encourage you to ask great questions. So with that, I'll put the letters on the board. ACT. Based on what you've learned here this morning, what action will you take? What change will you make? And is there something that you learned here this morning that you could teach to somebody else for your benefit and for theirs? So with that,